Okay, so second. Okay, so we are deep in this story in the Gemara about Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, and how Rabbi Gamliel summons Rabbi Yeshua to come to him on the day that he thought was Yom Kippur, and to come to him, quote, with your staff and with your money pouch. We learned yesterday that wasn't that Rabbi Gamliel was trying to assert his authority on Rabbi Yeshua, rather the true meaning of Torah is truth, and that's why Torah is unlike other wisdoms, which don't dictate how you have to behave. Other wisdoms just say, this is what the consequences will be if you do A, B, and C, but they don't say what you have to do. Torah, on the other hand, is a Torah of truth, and therefore Torah doesn't just tell us what the consequences will be if we do A, B, and C. The Torah rather tells us, therefore you have to act a certain way. Torah tells us what we need to do. So in Rabbi Gamliel's request to ask Rabbi Yeshua to visit him on his day of Yom Kippur, he wasn't just asking him to perform Torah, to just physically do what Rabbi Gamliel had asked. He was asking to be there 100%, to totally submit to the halacha, not just with his hands and feet, but to be there and to identify with halacha, and the litmus test of having that kind of connection to halacha, not just to come there physically, but to come there as if it's a regular day, with your money pouch, with your staff. Your whole being, even things which aren't connected to you directly, are also affected by this halacha. That's what truth is. Truth is something that, as we learned yesterday, it's something which is true. Truth is something that is in all places, in all times, and unchanging. And because the Torah is truth, therefore the Torah doesn't just dictate to us what the consequences might be, or tell us the truth of something and then leave us hanging what we should do about this truth. The Torah's truth is, the Torah reveals the truth in everything, and therefore it doesn't just tell us things how they are intellectually and emotionally, but there's always a conclusion factually, practically on the ground, because that's what truth is. Truth is something that permeates every place and every time. Let's continue now in Sign the Sikha on page 128, Ois Ches. The reason why Torah is different to other wisdoms is because Torah is the will and the wisdom of Hashem, which Hashem is called the truth of truth. What's unique about truth is that truth goes from one end to the other. The language over here, is a reference to the various supporting bars in the Mishkan, which are parallel to our three supporting bars in the walls of the Mishkan are parallel to our patriarchs, Av, Mitzvah, and Yaakov. And it says that the middle bars corresponds to Yaakov. That's why the middle bar extends from one end of the Mishkan to the other. It's extending from one end of the Mishkan to the other, emphasizes how Yaakov's attribute was truth. It isn't just something which is true in heaven and true and emotionally, true intellectually, but truth is something that goes from one end of the Mishkan to the other, which is parallel to going from all of existence in all places and all times. Truth is something that has to be correct in every place and every level. So when the Torah reveals the truth of something, Torah isn't satisfied with just saying this to you in your mind. Torah doesn't say, okay, here is what's going to happen if you do A, B, and C, and let's stop there. That's not truth. Truth is everywhere, every place, every time. So Torah is a little more aggressive, or a lot more aggressive. Torah says this is the truth, and therefore this is how you should behave. Truth doesn't. Someone was telling me yesterday about a certain Gadol B'Yisrael, a very great Torah giant, was long passed away. But After someone has passed away, you only say holy things, only good things about the person. He told me the reason why he thinks this person never visited the Rebbe was because he knew if he would visit the Rebbe, he would have to listen. The Rebbe is midasi midas emes. The Rebbe is like it says Moshe Rabbeinu, his attribute is truth, and therefore the Rebbe tells people what has to happen. And some people aren't ready for that kind of thing. So that's not just Moshe Rabbeinu or the Rebbe. That's what Torah is. Torah doesn't just tell you the way things are, call them as the Torah sees them, as God sees them. Rather, the Torah says, and therefore this is what you got to do, because that's what truth is. Truth is invasive. Truth is invasive. You don't always have to speak the entire truth to everybody and say everything that will cause machlekes. As a friend of mine once told me, you'll find the greatest truth in the house of the insane. Insane people don't have any filter. They say whatever is on their head, and but the Torah isn't insane. The Torah is the truth that we need to hear. Okay, the Torah is the truth, and therefore the Torah tells us what has to happen. So, Torah isn't satisfied with telling you this is the truth in your mind, and you can do something else. Torah insists on permeating the entire being of a person, including his action. Not only including his action, but action is the main thing. There's a letter to the Rebbe about the mitzvah of tefillin. And the Rebbe says in that letter that there are 3 different schools of thought. There is a school of thought which says that the most important thing is our ideologies. There's a school of thought that says the most important thing in our lives is our character. And there's a third school of thought which says the most important thing in our lives is what we do physically, practically. What does the Torah say? The Rebbe says the Torah is the Torah of truth and it's holistic. And the Torah wants the entire person, his heart, his mind, his ideology, his character, and his action. That's why the mitzvah of tefillin, which all the mitzvahs in the Torah connected to tefillin, have impact on our thoughts, and our feelings, and our action. A hand that puts on tefillin is different heart, different hand. So the Torah does this because that's what Torah is. Torah is truth. And truth is holistic. Truth is in every place and every time. So it's not that Torah also is holistic. Because Torah is truth, that's why it's holistic. This next column. That's why there's a difference between trying to absorb the wisdom of Torah to trying to absorb any other wisdom. As we discussed, halacha follows the opinion of Beis Hillel, even though Beis Shammai was a lot more intelligent than Beis Shammai. They were more astute, they were smarter than Beis Hillel. We still, halacha says, don't listen to Beis Shammai, the smart guys. Listen to Beis Hillel. Why? Seemingly, it would seem the halacha should be said according to the one whose mind is sharpest and his brain is the greatest. And that's why this person is capable of addressing the meaning of Torah with greater depth. He has greater wisdom. He could probe deeper into the Torah. He's smarter. Therefore, it would seem the halacha should follow Beis Shammai who are more intelligent. The answer why we don't follow Beis Shammai is as follows. In order to arrive at the truth of Torah, which is the halacha, you cannot get there with your mind alone. Everyone's mind has a predisposition to leanings towards different ways. There are those whose minds always gravitate towards kindness, those whose minds are more built judgmentally. Beis Hillel is always lenient because the souls of Beis Hillel are connected to chesed, connected to kindness. Beis Shammai's neshama comes from judgment, therefore Beis Shammai is always more strict. So you're not going to be able, using your mind alone, to arrive at the truth of Torah. You're going to have some kind of filtered truth that has to do with the way you see things based upon your persona. there's a great book called "And Rachel Was His Wife." It's about the story of Rabbi Akiva. It's an incredible book. And the book is written from the perspective of a friend of Rabbi Akiva's wife. The author tries to portray to us the righteousness of Rabbi Akiva's wife, Rachel, through the lens of her friend. And what the author is trying to do is a very noble thing, try to give us a perspective of a tzaddik. But as Rabbi Sola of Rizhin once said, that he is a hidden tzaddik. And his students are like, Rabbi Rizhin, Rabbi Yisrael, you're not actually a hidden tzaddik. The whole world knows about your righteousness. What do you mean you're a hidden tzaddik? And he said, Och and Vei, it would be terrible if all I was is what you see. There's far more in him they can't possibly understand. Or as the Rebbe said about the Rebbetzin, whose yahrzeit is today, that only God knows her true greatness. So to understand who Rachel, the wife of Akiva, is, you have to be like Rachel. So the author, in order to be able to actually understand the wife of Akiva, it's a great attempt, but it's going to be filtered through the perspective of the author. It's not going to get to the real truth of who Rachel is. Chaim Tappel, who played fiddler on the roof, is what he said. I don't know the backside of the story. This is what he said. He said that there was a series of movies coming out about our patriarchs and matriarchs, and various Gedolei Yisrael, various rabbis came out against this, how this is wrong and this is bad. And when he was in an audience with the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe, please don't say anything about this. Don't make any statements about this. I don't know if the Rebbe did, and I don't know what the Rebbe's opinion is about this. I mean, obviously, it's not kosher. It's not real. It's not true. So I can't imagine that this is something that helps the Jewish people to get this convoluted version of Moses and Abraham, whatever. But he asked that please don't come out against it. And somehow, in continuation to this audience, Rabbi Avram Shem Tov was sent by the Rebbe apparently to visit Chaim Tappel in the movie set. And he visited Chaim Tappel. I don't know if this was for the sake of the movie set or for the sake of Chaim Tappel. This is the story. He comes to Chaim Tappel and he says to him, is that how Avram looks? Avram, he's dressed like the Avraham of Hollywood, So he says, well, do you know how Avram looked? He says, of course, Avram looks like the Rebbe. Okay, and how did Yitzchak look? Yitzchak looked like the Rebbe. So Chaim Tappel enjoyed the perspective of a chassid that all our patriarchs and matriarchs look at the Rebbe, but the truth is that going to the Rebbe as well, it's not going to get you any closer to the description, because every chassid sees the Rebbe a different way. The Rebbe is a tzaddik, and our perception of the Rebbe is going to be filtered through our own persona. To know what a tzaddik is, you have to be a tzaddik. You can only imagine something based upon something similar in yourself. In a similar way with halacha, you're going to understand God's wisdom. You're going to get what Hashem's wisdom is. How can you figure out what Hashem's wisdom is? It's always you're going to read a biography about the Rebbe by Rabbi Din Stein Zaltzal V'Shalom. You're going to read a biography by Sheis Tau. Read a biography by whoever the author is. You're not going to get the Rebbe. You're going to get the Rebbe the way the Rebbe is seen through the persona of whoever's writing the novel, writing the biography. In a similar way, to get the halacha, what the halacha really is, you can't. You can because it's going to be filtered through your mind. Your chesed, you can get the Torah as it's filtered through chesed. Balachim. And therefore, there's another ingredient that's needed to study Torah. The Rebbe doesn't mention this here, but this is also the reason for the phenomena that although many people study Torah, the only ones who wrote brilliant scholarly works on Torah were tzaddikim, were righteous people. And the reason is because in order to get to the Torah, you have to have bittul. You have to nullify yourself. You have to push your mind away and be devoted to Hashem and nullify to Hashem, and therefore to hear what Hashem is telling you. Although it seems that the mind is built to be objective, what's your mind about? Your mind is about getting to the truth of things. That's how a mind is built. And it's possible for you to be able to hear another person's opinion, which is contrary to yours. That's how a mind is built. A mind, if you don't, I think we learned it last year, 2 years ago, the Sikh of the Rebbe about the four voices about Mount Sinai, What's unique about the mind is similar to the animal kingdom, that the mind can go from one place to another. You're not limited to seeing things only in one way. You're able to move away from your perspective and hear another perspective. It's possible. In our society, it's less possible, but it is possible. You could hear another opinion, and that's so too the Beis Shammai Beis Hillel did the same. Papa 129. You could hear something that is different to the way your nature dictates. There were instances in which Beis Shammai says, be lenient. There were instances in which Beis Hillel said, be strict. Although their soul was gravitated always to, it was attracted to the lenient side, they were able to go beyond themselves. Still, the mind remains what the mind is, and therefore it's not always able to receive the absolute truth of an idea the way it really is. However, when you have this quality of being nullified, of being devoted to Hashem's will and wisdom, by which you're able to completely depart from your own nature and your own tendencies of your mind, then you're able to actually arrive at the absolute truth. And therefore, halacha, which halacha is about the absolute truth, is according to Beis Hillel, because Beis Hillel had this faculty of bittul. They were, in the language of the Gemara, noichen aluven hayu. Noichen means they were pleasant, aluven means they were bashful. They're different adjectives, but the point that the Gemara is trying to say is they had this attribute of total devotion to Hashem, which is more significant than trying to understand the truth of Torah. To understand the truth of another wisdom, you don't need to have that, because you're not trying to get to the absolute truth. So you're able to study all the wisdoms without the faculty of bittul. Yes, there has to be some bittul to be able to have a broader mind, to be able to hear other perspectives, true. But it's not as pertinent in other wisdoms because you're not trying to get to the absolute truth of truth. In Torah, since the Torah is a truth, halacha is a truth of truth, therefore it's necessary in Torah to have this faculty more than in other wisdoms. The Rogatsh Gaon was famous for being very lenient giving smicha to boys from Chabad yeshivas, because he felt that they have Yirah Shamayim, they're God-fearing, and they won't paskin about something they don't know about. Even though they may not be as astute, they may not be as knowledgeable. Certain students were, of course, great geniuses, certain students weren't, but he felt that the kind of education they're getting, they'll have the sufficient fear of Hashem to be able to know when hands on, hands off. Okay, so that's...
Did your grandfather get smicha from him?
My great-grandfather, got smicha from him together with two other guys.
Rabbi Shem Tov, and who else?
I wanted to say the story, but now you're saying it's I can't say the story now. All right, moving right along. So the other guy was Yisrael Neach Blazinski, what's his name? It sounds like Blazinski, what's got his last name? Anyways, Indian Zen Nirmas Gamba Kach Shishis Sidney Mishnah is Peschem Mishnah Bemis Akina Shema Mustayim B'chol Hashem Elchsov B'chol Yom. This is also alluded to by the fact that the 6 orders of the Mishnah begin with the words, what time can you say Shema at night? That's the Talmud begins. And the Talmud concludes with the words, anyone who studies halacha every day is promised to share in the world to come. The Talmud begins with the time to say Shema. The Talmud concludes with, anyone who studies halacha every day is promised to share in the world to come. What's the connection between these two things? We know that the end, the beginning of something are always connected to each other. The conclusion of the Mishnah is about studying halacha, because the goal of all of the discussion in Torah is to arrive at the halacha. There are many kolos today, and there have been many kolos, that the Rebbe has discussed with those who run these kollels, that they should incorporate the study of halacha in the kollel. Sometimes you have a kollel, which they study Torah, their whole lives, but they don't discuss practically what to do. And not only are the people in the kollel not knowledgeable but very practical halacha, but besides that, they aren't really the benefit of all those that they could possibly teach halacha to they can't teach halacha because they study just theoretical ideas in Gemara, but not practically. It's so important to incorporate in your study of Torah halacha. Without knowing halacha, you don't know what to do. So, but it's not just know what to do. It's a different kind of study. You go deeper in the Torah to know how to apply it. It's specifically by halacha you're able to get to the absolute truth of Torah. So that's a conclusion. The conclusion of the Talmud is the goal is to study halacha. The goal is to get to the absolute truth of Torah. That's how the Talmud concludes. But how does the Talmud begin? What's the entryway to get into the Talmud? Next column. In order to arrive at the conclusion of the Torah, to understand the halacha, there's a need to have Shema first. Shema is what allows us to arrive at halacha. If you don't say Shema, you can't understand the halacha. Why? What's Shema about? Shema, when you say Shema, you're supposed to accept upon yourself Hashem as your king. Kabol Samach Hashemayim. Because of your devotion to God's will and your sense of reverence for Hashem, because you accepted upon yourself God as your king, you study Torah also with that sense of devotion and accepting the yoke of heaven. The one who's studying the halacha knows that it's dependent upon him if another Jew will do what God wants him to do. Do the opposite. Therefore, he is frightened, trying before he issues his ruling, am I going to say the right thing? A guy is going to do something, is it right or wrong? And because of this, he pushes himself on the side. He becomes a vessel for the absolute truth of Torah and is able to attune to the actual halacha. So that's why the Talmud begins with the Shema and it concludes with the halacha. You want to learn halacha properly, it depends upon how you say Shema. The way you say Shema, that's the way you'll arrive at the truth of Torah. There's a spectrum of how well you say Shema and how devoted you are to the Eibishter. An off-color comment. There was Jonathan wants something off-color today, so another off-color comment I don't get to share with you. There was a certain very famous rabbi who was suggested as a shidduch for one of the Morozov daughters, or the Morozovs, and one of the sisters wanted to go check out on him to see if he'd be check out on him to see if you're appropriate shidduch for the family. He was known to be a very great rabbi. And she came back with the following remark. He says, our father's Asher Yotzar is better than Hishman the Esrei. So in order to be able to arrive at the halacha of Torah properly, you have to have the Shema. There has to be the devotion to Hashem. And that's more important than your genius. Your devotion to the Eibush will help you get to the truth of Torah. Okay. Ois Yud. This will help us understand why Torah grants peace, true peace, between those who are arguing about Torah. So that everyone agrees, even with their minds, to the halach. We're not talking about peace among the Jewish people yet. We're just talking about peace within Torah. When we're talking about something that is only relegated to the world of the intellect, and there are differences of opinion, then everyone's opinion remains intact. In the world of intellect, there are different perspectives. In the world of intellect, there are different angles. So there is room for more than one opinion. That's in the world of intellect. The wisdom that exists by the nations of the world understands as well that you can only practically do one thing. You can't do two different things. As if there are two different opinions, you can't follow both. A government cannot run with that based upon everyone doing what they think. So when there are different opinions about a certain subject, how does government get decided? How does a court get decided? They go by the majority. And everyone has to follow the majority opinion. So in a non-Jewish court, in the government of the United States and other countries, there are decisions made based on majority, similar it would seem to Torah, but there's a difference. Although there is one ruling that is issued from the Senate, from the Congress, and everyone has to now follow the rule that the law of America now is based upon what the majority of the justices of the Supreme Court have said. However, the minority opinion of the Supreme Court still is a dissenting view. They do not agree. Those senators are at odds with the others, and as we see in today's very politicized world, there are certainly very strong opinions, despite the fact that the law is different than their opinion. They constantly try to change the law, and they're not satisfied just because the majority ruled a certain way. Is unlike the way things are based upon in the world of Torah. When the Torah gives a hayirah, Torah gives a practical guidance, halacha, of what you're supposed to do, the Torah is actually revealing the absolute truth of something. Since the Torah is truth, so therefore it affects every single level. It doesn't matter if a person's thoughts are naturally inclined to the side of kindness or the side of judgment. This is the halacha, and the halacha is accepted in every place, including the mind of the one who was the dissenting view. And therefore, listen to this. When a Jew learns Torah with a Shema Yisrael, he learns Torah in a way that is permeated with devotion to Hashem, with Kabbalah Sil, with his accepting upon himself the yoke of Hashem. That transforms him to become a vessel to receive the truth of Torah. When he hears a halacha, and he hears a halacha that, according to the rules of the Torah, is not according to his opinion, it's not according to his logic, it's like the other person's opinion. So because he's so devoted to God's will, he invests himself again in the subject, he goes deeper into it, and with his new depth in the subject, he is able to come to a new recognition with his own mind that is in sync with the opposing view with the halacha. This is true even if, more far out example, let's say he's actually an interested party. The halacha is that Reuben is correct, you have to pay him $1,000. If someone is really devoted to the Eibishter, not only if he's on the court and he disagrees with this psak halacha, but it would seem, based upon what the Rebbe is saying, that even if he is the interested party, he should be capable to discover how, with his mind, why halacha should follow the other opinion. Now, a Jewish court is not allowed to be decided by any people who have any vested interests. And the Gemara says stories about great tzaddikim who recused themselves from certain cases because they felt they had a vested interest. And despite recusing themselves, and despite the slight vested interest that existed, still they found themselves gravitating and being inclined to ruling halacha in a certain way. There is something the mind is built to see things a certain way, and yes, you're not going to, just because you're a devoted to Hashem, you will all of a sudden, it'll make sense. But the Rebbe is saying that you have what it takes to arrive with your mind at the truth of Torah. Hashem built in you as a Jew a neshama, and with your neshama, if you try, you will be able to accept the halacha. The halacha can make sense to you. I know in fourth grade, the way we studied Gemara was, Rabbi Palakal Vashalom would ask us, this is Abaya's opinion, this is Rav's opinion, what's your opinion? He did this because he wanted us to open up our minds and let us, not just blindly follow whatever the Torah says, but we should learn Torah with our mind. That's how you're supposed to study Torah. How do you think? Do you agree with Abai? Agree with Rav? But we were learning El Metzias, the laws of Yesh Lamidas, and once the halacha is ruled like a Rava, you have to now understand Rava differently. You have to now address Rava differently. This is what the Torah, this is what God says. God says, actually, I'm sorry, the halacha follows like Abai. Whatever. So Yalkagam. Anyways, the point is that when a Jew knows halacha is a certain way, he is able to totally divest himself from his previous tendencies, inclinations, and to arrive at the truth of Torah. And that's why the conclusion of the Mishnah is with the words, God did not find a greater vessel for blessing than peace, because with Torah, the true pursuit of Torah, the pursuit of Torah is a pursuit of truth, which when it's done with devotion to finding out what Hashem wants, brings us all to being together in the halacha and being at peace with each other. Any questions or comments or criticism? Okay. Great day, Jeff. Great day, David. Great day, Rebel. Great day, Mordechai. Great day, Dr. Bressman. Great day, Yonatan. Great day, Reb Zev.